This is the Ed Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us. Greetings and salutations, everybody, far and wide. My name is Matt Stranick, and this is the latest in the Ed Non-Tech series of conversations. I am without the inestimable Dr. Doug Reed today, but nevertheless, you can be assured that he is highly interested in this. I'll put it out there that Dan over at the Music Podcast is pretty stoked as well. There's a lot of stokage going on, I think I can fairly say, with our latest guest. This has been in the works for some time. Jim Ruland, Jim Verman, you may know him as. He's a couple of really excellent writers, at least. And we're going to be speaking to Jim, who has written a whole wide variety of different kinds of writing projects. A lot of them in book form, not all of them, different kinds of books. If you're a fan of the Music Podcast or have even heard of punk music even or a bit, you'll know that some of his collaborators by name, including the likes of Bad Religion, including the likes of Keith Morris from legendary band The Circle Jerks, and he's written just a whole wide range of, like I say, pretty diverse projects, and we're going to be talking about his novel, which came out last year, spring of last year, which in book terms, it's still pretty much fresh off the presses as far as I'm concerned, Make It Stop, which is, again, quite a departure from any other of the works that he's completed so far. I really just got to say, Jim, thank you so much for being here, Matt.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, and again, just because of, just to sort of set it up within the wider educational endeavor or whatnot, because this is going out onto the education show, this sort of follows a series wherein we're trying to bring in people from a pretty wide variety of creative endeavors. So we've had various authors, which I'm really stoked about because I have a degree in English and I've been known to dabble myself in the narrative arts variously. So I actually have been aware of your work, Jim, since I discovered the SST book on Amazon. Corporate Rock Sucks, The Rise and Fall of SST Records. And again, such a great, compelling, radical project from anybody who knows anything about independent music of the last 30 years whatsoever. 40 years, my goodness, we're all getting old. And I guess before I get into any of the specific stuff, I always kind of have this opening gambit, just because what you've done covers so many diverse areas, Jim. I mean, if I've seen, your author page and everything else, some very good descriptions there. But if you were just kind of speaking to somebody who's maybe not familiar with your work necessarily, what would you tell them? What you're about, what your interests are as a writer, sir?
Yeah, well, I usually start with music, like when the conversation comes up at a dinner party or in an airport, that kind of thing, because it's a lot easier to latch on to a certain style or genre of music and say that's what I write about, and judging from that reaction, I can either go from there or not. I'm not the kind of person that hates talking about writing or my work. I think most writers are thrilled when anyone asks them, but sometimes you get asked by people who are not readers, and then it feels like you're being backed into a corner, or like why haven't I heard of you? Why aren't you more successful? And it's like, now we're not talking about art anymore. And that's what, so I like to say I write about punk rock and gauge the reaction from there.
That is amazing. I really just appreciate the whole setup of that because, again, the non-reading public is vast, and regrettably, it's getting larger all the time. So it's almost like, I guess, the inverse of what you've sort of described is when you sort of encounter somebody who actually sort of is hip to, the projects or knows a little bit about it, as opposed to, well, like, why aren't you Tom Clancy? Why don't I see you at the airport bookshelf, right? Like, come on,
Yeah.
man. So
maybe I should be that. I'm Tom Clancy's ghost, and I go from there.
that is absolutely the correct response. And I guess just to begin with, though, like when I'm sort of thinking upon the whole endeavor, I mean, writers compared to musicians, musicians have no shame. Musicians, when they're teenagers, will just get up in front of anybody and just bash away at their thing. So by the time they're 25, they might have a decade and a half of practicing in public. With writers, it's more of a slow boil, even to get people to like recognize your work as something that deserves a public. So I just wonder, like, for you growing up, first of all, you are based in Los Angeles, right? You're based in LA as your full-time home.
Now or no? I'm based.
Well, okay, so now, or I guess in the past, this is maybe something I should have looked into a little bit more.
No. Like I was.
But
I was
if I can, and where are you now?
I'm in San Diego, California, not too far from LA. I've been there for, I don't know, a long time, longer than I lived in LA. I lived in LA for about 5 years, and
Okay.
I mean, sorry, 10 years. So it was a long time.
Good.
And I write for the LA Times, so it's a natural assumption for
There we go. Sorry,
people to assume that I live there. And I had a reading series for a number of years that I kept going in Los Angeles after I left because I missed it. I missed hanging out with my friends and going to events at the bookstores and being part of that literary community in Los Angeles, which is extremely supportive. You hear all kinds of things about how cutthroat the music industry is in LA, or the film and TV business, and maybe that's true, but it does not apply to the writing community. They're
awesome.
Very supportive, very
glad to hear that.
Yeah.
From the land of Bukowski, yeah, absolutely. So again, thanks for I guess the clarification. Now, when you were a young person coming up, I mean, you were in the military. It seems like you had a pretty wide variety of things you did, maybe concurrently with the writing, as often happens, maybe sort of as a pre-chapter to what you're up to. I mean, again, I guess, were you always into writing of some variety? Because, like, for me, I have pretty distinct memories as, like, a kid, like figuring out the basics of a story, like just all of that stuff. It was kind of always around in my mind and is something I was doing. I wonder if that was the same for you, or if it was something you maybe found a little bit later.
No, I was a big reader as a kid, and it was definitely something aspirational.
Yeah.
I didn't know any writers. I mean, there's some in my family. There's a screenwriter, and I really looked up to him, but he was older and he was already working in Hollywood, which felt like another universe. So I would say that, when I was really young and, I had ambitions of being a writer, but it was like saying I wanted to be a fireman or an astronaut. It was just, something that sounded cool. And I was not a very good high school student. I went to a private Catholic school and did not distinguish myself there, much to my parents' chagrin.
Undistinguished.
Instead of going off to an elite college like most of my peers, I enlisted in the Navy. And things did not really improve from there. You'd be shocked to learn. And I did not come out of the Navy, with a lot of, high self-esteem or this idea of, any kind of career in the arts or anything. I was just really glad I got out and had college benefits. And it wasn't until I took an English class, actually my first semester, with my professor, Dr. Timothy Poland, and we were writing these kind of experiential essays that you write about in freshman composition, except instead of writing about my paper route or my pet or my first girlfriend or my grandmother dying or something like that, I was writing about helicopter operations during a monsoon in the South China Sea. And so my professor was like, "Oh, well, this is different." And so I think because I was just writing things that were a little bit more interesting to read, he gave me a lot of attention and a lot of feedback, which I was absolutely craving without realizing it. But I was just dying for someone to notice me in a positive way. And so after that, I really latched on to this idea of maybe writing being something I was good at.
Awesome. I really appreciate as well the shout out to the college English teacher, only in as much as I'm about 2.5 weeks away from starting a gig as a college English teacher. It was something I did way back at the beginning of my career, 15 plus years ago, and now I'm going back to it, and I am stoked because it's been too long for me for doing that. And so I guess I really appreciate, just from the educator standpoint, hearing this kind of thing. I wonder, like, in terms of not having that much interest in school, which again, I can definitely relate to. I mean, you celebrated a birthday yesterday, which without going into it, I can maybe sort of think that you were into the first wave of punk while it was going on, or do you want to maybe just describe how the music scene for you became something that became inseparable from your public creative profile, if I can put it that way?
Sure. It's I've shared this story many times. I graduated high school in 1986, and that's the year that Black Flag broke up. So no, I was not part of the first wave.
Not white. Okay.
And like I mentioned, I was in a Catholic private school, and I was very much not succeeding or not thriving, but I was very much a rule follower, and I wanted to fit in and all those things, but not having a whole lot of luck. But I discovered the Ramones, and I started listening to cassettes, and my brother and I were both obsessed with the Ramones. We started with a record, and then we had a record player that we shared, but we were in that first wave of knockoff Walkmans. So I would copy tapes of all the Ramones records, and then or buy them. I mean, that's the other thing, is the Ramones were on a major label. Those cassettes were pretty easy to find, and I bought them all and listened to them all. And it was around the time when I first started working, and I worked for an electronics company and installing security alarms, and we had a work van, and so I would play that all the time. And so that was really my intro. And then I went to see the Ramones when I was in high school with my brother. My mother had to take us because we were underage, and it was a bar, the place called the Wax Museum in Washington, D.C., which is not there anymore. In fact, it shut down about a month or two after the show. And this is like 84 or 85, I think 85.
Wow. Prime years for music, in my opinion, man. Like, just in terms of everything that was going on. If you're talking about the DC scene, if you're talking about Husker Du, the Replacements, Midwest kind of punk and all this, as well as obviously the significant stuff going on in LA and New York and elsewhere. I mean, those were really prime formative years. I was in grade 2, I'm not going to lie, but music is subsequently.
This is absolutely true, but I did not shave my head and buy a leather jacket and start, disobeying my parents, at least overtly. It took me a while, and when I graduated, high school, I enlisted in the Navy, and it was really there that I got a really good music education because my shipmates were now, there was like a punk rocker from LA, a metal a metal guitar player from Phoenix, a skinhead from Louisiana, and they were all giving me their music, and so that's kind of what started all of that. You know, you know, I'd be listening to like Bauhaus and TSOL and Go in the Bunnymen and you know, Cockney Rejects and all, Bad Religion, Social Distortion, all of these, all are on the same tape. So it was definitely that time when college radio was flourishing, and all, right before it became morphed into alternative music, but that was coming.
Absolutely, man. That is so cool. Just kind of hearing about how all these different folks from various walks of life entering what they don't call it the green machine if you're in the Navy, but you're all on and young people, formative times, right? Relatively sharing that stuff.
Yeah, we're literally in the fleet. I did a 6-month cruise in the Western Pacific, and all you have are your tapes and and it becomes part of your identity. So people would share things with me, but they share them very passionately.
Of course, the fandom runs deep.
Yeah, because they become an extension of where you're from, which when you're in the military, where you're from is also extremely important. It's also part of your identity.
And if I may, I don't think you mentioned this, but maybe you did. How many years did this last for you, this chapter of your life, before sort of moving on with great relief into the next phase?
Well, my military service was for 6 years, but only 2 were active duty.
Okay.
And so, I graduated in '86 and I started college in '88, and I was in the reserves the whole time, but
Gotcha.
I was only active duty for 2 years. So
Yeah.
Those 2 years felt and still feel like a lifetime.
Pivotal moments for sure. So then when you sort of finished up, when you were sort of during the college time, is that when I was looking at Razor Cake? Just it's still going. In case anybody out there who follows the Punkcast wants to know, it's still out there. It's still going. I was surprised. There's a podcast associated with Razor Cake in the 800 plus episodes. So still a very vibrant. It says what non-profit punk on the website. It seems like it's a very wildly creative, vital thing that's still going on. And I guess for those who may not be aware of zine culture generally at all, how would you sort of describe your involvement with Razor Cake? Over the years, from when you became involved to your most recent, I suppose.
Sure. Well, going back, fast forward to I got out of college and I moved to California because I was gonna, I was gonna get my residency in California, and I was gonna go to Berkeley and begin my career as like a literary scholar, a James Joyce scholar of all things. And,
whoa, respect.
But then I got out to LA and I realized, oh well, this is a lot more competitive than it was in the '60s and more expensive. I really have no chance of getting into Berkeley, so let me see what else is there. And a customer, I worked at a coffee shop, and a customer walked in. He's like, "Have you ever thought of going to Flagstaff?" I'm like, "Flagstaff, Arizona?" He's like, "Yeah, it's like the Santa Cruz of Arizona." And I'm like, "Okay." So I looked into it, and it turned out they would give you money to teach, and they would waive your tuition. So I was like, "Okay, that sounds pretty good." So
wow.
I went to Flagstaff to get my master's degree, and that's where I met Todd Taylor. And Todd Taylor, we were roommates in the master's. Eventually became roommates, and I stayed on for another year to teach, and he moved back to LA to join Flipside Fanzine to work with them. Well, that
Huge
last
stuff. Non-punks, this is huge stuff.
huge,
Flipside is just very well known, very well regarded. Maybe not as much as Maximum Rock and Roll, but I mean, highly influential print publication. Yeah.
well, the difference was people actually liked reading Flipside. I'm kidding. Yeah, there's always been a little bit of Northern California, Southern California squabbling between the two, but yeah, Flipside started in 1977. It was very much an important part of the LA punk scene, alongside Slash and I don't know who else it would be as important to the LA punk scene. And but it was in the 90s, and the Flipside wasn't doing that well, and it eventually folded right around the end of the century. And Todd and another one of our classmates from Flagstaff started up Razor Cake. And so I immediately, when Todd was working at Flipside, the first thing he did was send me CDs so I could review them. And by the end of my run there, I was, doing interviews and had a column. And so when Todd started up Razor Cake, I joined on board, and also with a note to myself that, like, I want to take this a little bit more seriously. I viewed punk rock as writing for zines as a way to access the music I love. But as much as I loved the music, I loved everything that went with it, all the partying, the going to shows in dangerous places and weird clubs, and drinking too much and having too much fun, and all the stuff that went with it. And it showed in the work I did for Flipside. At least that's how I felt, coming from someone with still had some literary ambitions, and I decided I wanted to try harder, do better, turn my work shit in on time. And when I started with Razor Cake.
Awesome. So you kind of set at it as a new kind of endeavor, and I mean, it's still going, and you're still associated with it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm on the board. I'm a columnist. I have a new piece every 2 months.
Awesome.
I don't do that many interviews, but I still do the occasional interview. I did one earlier this year with a Navajo artist, and so yeah, I'm still very much passionate about Razor Cake. And Todd is an incredible writer, editor, and human being, and he has kept it going on the strength of like hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and he manages it all alongside with Daryl. And it's an amazing magazine, and I don't see it slowing down at any point.
That is so incredibly cool that something you became involved with that long ago is still vital. I mean, that must give you a sort of sense of pride isn't the right word, but just being able to contribute to something over its longevity must really feel pretty good, I think.
Well, yeah, I think, as a young writer, I thought, like, well, let me try. You'll try different things. People ask you to do things. You're like, well, sure, maybe it'll lead to something. And when I started writing for those punk zines, I realized, well, like, writing for punk zines doesn't lead to anything except more writing for punk zines. You have to really love it, which I did. And but for me, it ended up leading to some things. It led almost directly to the book that I wrote with Keith Morris, My Damage. I don't think if I didn't have that cred, that someone like Keith, who was one of the inventors of hardcore and was there at the very beginning of Southern California punk rock, would have agreed to work with me if I hadn't didn't have that pedigree, that punk rock pedigree.
Absolutely. So that is was so again. I'm still not 100% on full, specific chronology or whatever, but during this period, I mean, you sort of working on short stories? Were you working on, what turned into your first novel? I mean, while you were sort of participating in writing and documenting about this scene and having some, momentum forward going that way, I wonder, as you say, the Joyce, the narrative aspects, was that sort of something you were doing concurrently, or was it more something where when you had an opportunity as an established writer to sort of have a book published after having done so, like, I guess, to sort of start going into the awesome book that came out just last year. That's not your first work of fiction, but it is your first novel that's been published. Am I making a mistake there? It's your second. So if you could just maybe set it up for us about how the narrative work stands relative to your work, which is in the nonfiction kind of biographical realm.
Sure. Well, I was doing a little bit of everything. A jack of all trades, master of none. I was working at a advertising agency. I was doing the stuff with the punk rock zines. I was writing short stories and submitting to literary magazines. I was submitting to, online journals. I was writing book reviews, but I don't think I was doing any of it particularly well as my partying and my, disease of alcoholism progressed until finally in 2009, I said, okay, that's enough. I can't do this anymore. And so if you do look at the books I have published, the vast majority of them are published after 2009. And it's no accident. I had a collection of short stories come out in 2005 that I've been working on for some of them for as many as 10 years, 15 years. But it wasn't until I got sober that I was able to give things the focus and the depth of attention that they deserved. And that's when I actually started finishing novels and started feeling like I was reaching, they were measuring up to the the goal I'd set for them, that they were achieving, I felt like I'd executed what I'd set out to do.
Well, and I think what you're talking about, and this is something that, I've had come up when I've spoken with other, particularly novelists, I have to say, but it's sort of like, the weekend warriors, or, you can have these brilliant epiphanies, after you're 3 beers in. It's like everything sounds brilliant. You're much more confident. The inner voice, and then a weekend goes by or a month, and I'm like, or the hypothetical person is just like, it's just sitting there. It's lost momentum. It's so finishing a project over the long term, aided and abetted by some positive lifestyle choices, sounds like it's really worked for you. And if I can just say, is sobriety still like a piece of what? Is it a piece of your creativity still, or is that
I would say it's a cornerstone of it, in that I don't think that I would be able to work productively in any of the different things that I do, whether it's client work and collaborating with people or on my own creative projects. I think it would suffer, if I tried to go back to that kind of lifestyle. I don't see it as tenable. So it's very, very much an important part of my identity and my worldview, and I think that's reflected also in the novel Make It Stop.
Well, and plus, I also have noticed, just following your Instagram, I've been traveling vicariously because you, through your, I guess, newspaper writing assignments. So if we're talking about, the various kind of works you do again, pardon me for any errors here, but as I've seen it come up, you have put work out for newspapers, journalism, magazine, longer form kind of work. You have been around and witnessed the utter flattening of the print ecosystem, right? For writing and publishing. It went from, whatever it was before the internet, and you have, seems like, a pretty good vantage point as a writer during this time. So you also, as well as the website, you have, in the newspaper work, you have a newsletter. There's a Substack that you curate and tend to, which I subscribe to. And it just seems like there's sort of all these various aspects now. My best friend's dad writes books in his retirement, and he calls it, there's the writing and then there's the writage. There's like what you kind of have to do to kind of keep the main creative enterprise going. So to just kind of wind it up here, pretty long wind up for a question, but honestly, I sort of have to ask, what's it been like in the contemporary media environment since, the switch to digital, which has disenfranchised lots of print-based publications and authors. And I guess, what would you recommend, or like what works for you in terms of when you're deciding, X, Instagram, Substack? I mean, I don't think you have a LinkedIn. I mean, how does that all tie together for people who don't know?
Wow, that's a great question. I was never a full-timer at any of those places, at a newspaper or a magazine. And so I think the people who were full-time writers and then had that cut off, that's been much more drastic. I was always a freelancer, and especially for the LA Times, I've been freelancing for probably, gosh, I don't even know, 15, 20 years now, but with a whole bunch of different editors. But I'm a zine guy, so like, even if there were no more newspapers, even if magazines were outlawed, I would just make my own. I'd just take a piece of paper and fold it up and write on it, and give it out to my friends. I mean, I'm positive I would do that. So and because I write for fanzines for music, I was never interested in being a critic that's going to rip apart a novel that I hated. Now, if I sit with you and I read a novel and I hated it, I'll tell you why, but I don't think it's a productive use of my time to write about it and make people feel bad about a work of art that they created just because some asshole in San Diego doesn't like it. So fanzines are all about lifting up the music that you love. And I think there are thousands of books published every year. And so when I read something, and if I like it, I love it, or even like it a lot, what's the harm in lifting it up so other people can enjoy it too? So yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to, make a name for myself as a critic. I just an enthusiastic reader. And as you can tell, I like things that are kind of intersect with other things as well. Something that maybe is not 100% in a music camp or 100% in a literary camp, or a mystery camp or a horror camp, but kind of as a blend of all those things. Then yeah, of course I'd spend time writing about it, for whoever wants to listen.
You want to elevate, not eviscerate. You want to apply some PMA on the thing and kind of, it's the best use of one's own personal bandwidth, I think, to try and bring stuff up. And so, I mean, again, this is where, like, prior to having this podcast, I was just like, I was really, and I do want to be respectful of your time, but I'm gonna, Dan over at the music podcast will not, he'll be asking me why I didn't ask about, it seems like with the Keith Morris book, right, you're writing pretty involved with just one individual person. And then when you're writing with Bad Religion, I mean, I found it interesting that they are sort of collectively an author of the book, and then you are a co-author. So working with all those different voices as opposed to just sort of with one individual presence in the form of Keith, versus, the entirely, what do you call it, reportage from the outside with inside sources that was in the SST book.
Mm-hmm.
All of those are so different from each other, but still pulling from within the same scene, the same sort of wider alternative music milieu. And so, I mean, before I let you off the call, I really just got to ask, what stands out from these projects that's different? What similarities? What have you taken away? And how has it helped you grow as a writer and as a person working with such dynamic, creative individuals across these endeavors?
Right. Well, I think of those 3 books that are all about, for more or less, the LA punk rock scene as a kind of unofficial trilogy. They all had the same editor, and
I did not know that.
And Keith Morris is in all of them. So, that would be the through line. And I did the book with Keith, and that was kind of a pinch myself moment that I'd be, wow, I'm sitting in Los Feliz apartment, in Keith's apartment, and he's telling me stories about punk rock and Repo Man and all this stuff that I grew up loving, and it was a pretty incredible experience to have. But I also came away with a lot of respect for Keith, because he's a very straightforward person and a very direct person, and also a very honest person. But he was completely engaged in the book. I think he read it at least 3 times, one time including after it had been proofread, and he caught things that the proofreaders missed. I mean, he was thoroughly engaged in that book, which isn't really a surprise once you get to know like the kind of person he is and the style of music he does. He doesn't do things half-ass.
Not even a bit. And he's still out there and he's still active. I was a bit regretful to hear that Off has been, they're calling it a season, but Circle Jerks are still out there kicking ass, right? So
I was just in New York last weekend, and I saw the penultimate Off show, at least as it stands today. The last one's going to be this weekend in Los Angeles. But I went to that show. I've probably seen Off maybe a dozen times now. Just a little bit less than I've seen Bad Religion. But back to the answering your question, the Bad Religion book came out just because of dumb luck, in the sense that the Keith Morris book was coming out in paperback around the time that Bad Religion was looking for a book, or for someone to collaborate on a book with them. And it just so happened that their tour manager lives in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area, and a lot of the writers he knows out there also happen to be friends of mine. So when he would say, "Hey, I'm looking for a writer, who do you know?" they were like, "Well, Jim Ruland just did a book with Keith Morris. You should ask him." And I only think it happened maybe 2 times, if not, that was it. But that was enough. And so I was interviewed by him and the 4 main voices of the Bad Religion book, and that's how that came to be. And then the Corporate Rock Sucks book was too long and involved a story, to tell about how that came to be, but was a very different style of project, in that it was going to involve so much more research. And that I knew, someone said early on that, like, man, like, you're going to have every cranky Gen Xer sending you angry emails for the rest of your life. And I was like,
is it true? Did that come to pass?
No, but it might have if he hadn't said that to me, because I was like, you're right. I really got to be careful. I got to be very thorough and meticulous. And, there are mistakes in that book. I'm not saying there aren't, but they're not like the kind of mistakes where I'm pretending to know something, speak about something that I know absolutely nothing, which I think people can always tell and get really aggravated by that. And, and I treated the material with respect. So even when I got it wrong, it was not like from a place of malice or ego or something like that. At least that's
no lawsuits forthcoming from Greg Ginn.
No. So yeah, I think that each of those projects, the level of difficulty became, increasingly, more challenging. Um, but those were great experiences, and looking forward to doing something to the next thing.
Well, and that is highly rad. So again, being mindful of time here, but again, I feel remiss not to ask you about the new book, because I mean, it's so awesomely written. I mean, it's just, I can literally open any page of it and just like within a paragraph, just find a nugget there where I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
and this is lit from a writing perspective and from a story perspective. You don't always get both. You get a lot of literary books that just meh story. It's about my personal expression. But you got so many it's just it's what you look for in good comic writing, but that is also very story driven. So there's a lot of power behind the engine or whatever in this really sick car, to use a metaphor. So I guess I just wonder, that's your most recent book that's out now. I mean, was it something where it was just a couple of years or relatively short build for that, or was it something you were working on for a super long time? And what would you like people to take away from it if, one were to ask?
Well, sure. Thank you so much for that. That's very kind and generous, and I really appreciate it, because I wanted to write something that was very well written. Of course, nobody wants to write something that's poorly written. But when I started out, I had this idea, right, that I wanted the book it takes place in a world where if you don't pay your hospital bills, you don't get to check out. You become essentially, these prisons become prison hospitals.
Yes, yes.
So,
From a
and
Canadian standpoint, looking at the American, thing, it's just like, wow, there's so much. That's such a rich, premise in and of itself, right? So,
well, yeah, I thought it was like a really strong premise, but I really struggled with it. I'll be honest with you, it was a real struggle. I think because I had such high intentions for it, and that like this is an American story about this path of corporate healthcare that we're on, and it's not that I was trying to write the great American novel, but it was something in that category, right? I was trying to write something important,
absolutely.
And after like the however many drafts, I realized that it was not working. That I was like, okay, you know what? Let me just make this an entertaining book. Let me just not be so um, maybe arrogant or conceited or just too high-minded about its intention, and let the book, just move at its own speed, but let it be a quick one, and let it be engaging for the reader. And if the reader gets larger messages out of it because they're struggling with with addiction, or they've been through the ringer of corporate healthcare, then that's great. And I feel like I achieved that. It's not War and Peace. It's not, it kind of straddles some genres. I don't think booksellers really quite know where to put it, and that's just fine with me, because when people read it, they tend to read it quickly and they like it. So
It's the highest thing you can give a book when you want to get through it, right? At least to me, it's it doesn't have to have like anything deeply profound for it to have weight, and for the fact that again, the highest calling that any artist can have is to, I think, entertain sincerely and with conviction, and that's very much what I see within the pages of Make This Stop. So honestly, sir, I would like to go longer. I'd like to ask you to shout out all your favorite contemporary authors and or musicians. But again, for the middle of the day, being respectful of your time. I just say thanks a lot for being here. I'm really looking forward to writing up some pretty minimal notes with a lot of the resources we've talked about. So folks, if you don't know every single book that Jim has out there, don't worry about it. We're going to have links to it. And as mentioned, his Substack, the workout report, is just absolutely lit. There's just any of the various channels that Jim is running are all totally worth checking out. And I just say, Jim, is there anything or anybody you want to shout out, or anything you'd like to throw into the recording before we shut her down?
No, I mean, we are in, like, we've been living through, like, the last 10 days have been so head spinning with, between the attempted assassination and the Republican convention and Biden dropping out of the race, that I feel like anything I say might be, seem quaint 10 minutes from now. We're moving at warp speed here, so.
Well, absolutely, bro. And again, as a Canadian, kind of just observing the whole American scene right now, I'm like, okay, you got the drama. Maybe we could just dial back the drama just a tad.
Yeah.
I'm planning on making a little visit down to the States post-election around Christmas time to take in some rock concerts. It's going to bring my teenagers. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. It'll be sort of interesting to kind of come out from the other side of this very interesting summer we're living through right now. So, Jim, it has been an absolute pleasure. Folks, you got to check out his books. You got to check out his reporting. You got to sign up for the Substack. It's all highly lit. All of it's going to be on the post at the end of the recording. Thanks, everybody. Take care for now. I'm going to end the recording. See you later, everybody.